The soul is born in the fire. There is a hidden alchemy to suffering, one that is rarely spoken of, yet endlessly repeated in the lives of those who feel too much, too soon. I have observed that the journey of the soul often begins not in comfort, but in rupture. And more often than we dare admit, that rupture begins at home. Yes, the family, the sacred container of origin, may also be the first battlefield of the psyche. It is there, in the earliest years, that the child meets not only love, but contradiction. Where the arms that cradle may also constrict, where the voices that teach may also wound, it is in this crucible I have found that the strong soul is forged. The toxic family does not merely damage, it initiates. It draws forth the shadow, it awakens the archetypes, it tests the spirit before it knows its own name. What is called toxic in the modern tongue is, in archetypal language, the presence of chaos where there should have been order. A parent whose love is conditional becomes, in symbolic terms, the false king or the devouring mother. A household where silence replaces honesty becomes the realm of the wounded child, banished from their own emotional truth. And yet, I have seen that in this darkness a seed of fire is planted. The child learns to listen, not merely to what is said, but to what is hidden. They become attuned to the language of the unspoken, the subtle tremors beneath behavior. They are initiated prematurely into the mysteries of the human condition. This is no light burden, but it is the beginning of vision. You see, the self, the wholeness of who you are meant to become, requires friction to emerge. It does not bloom in ease. It rises like flame from pressure, from fragmentation, from the breaking of illusion. The toxic family, then, becomes a stage upon which the great psychic drama is first played. The child, unaware, steps into a script written by generations before them. They inherit not only blood, but unhealed trauma, unconscious projections, and ancestral wounds, and yet within them stirs something ancient. A quiet refusal, a knowing, the soul's whisper, "This is not who I truly am." That whisper is the first breath of individuation. It is the beginning of separation, not from love, but from false belonging. From inherited roles, from the haunting repetition of pain passed down as tradition, the child who survives such a home is not weak, but forged. They carry within them a spiritual musculature, one that, when conscious, becomes compassion, intuition, and vision. But when unconscious, it may become shame, self-abandonment, or rage. Thus begins the true work, to return to those ruins with the lantern of awareness, to walk through the burned house of childhood with reverence, not resentment. To see the father not only as the tyrant, but as a man consumed by his own shadow. To see the mother not only as wounded, but as a vessel for unconscious pain never made conscious. This is not to excuse. It is to understand, and in understanding the soul is freed, not from the past, but from its chains. The strong soul, born in the furnace of dysfunction, is the one that eventually dares to turn and face the fire, not to be consumed, but to carry its flame forward with wisdom. This is the paradox I offer you. The very place that hurt you is also the place that awakened you, and in that sacred paradox, the soul begins its long and holy return to itself. The soul speaks in images, not in logic. It suffers, it dreams, it knows. In my long search through the corridors of the unconscious, I came upon a presence that could not be reduced to thought or instinct. I called it the soul, not in a religious sense, but as the living core of the human being. The soul, as I came to understand it, is not the ego. It is not the mask you wear or the roles you play. It is something older, quieter, and infinitely more enduring. Where the ego concerns itself with appearances, order, and survival, the soul is concerned with meaning. In the setting of a toxic family, the soul becomes both witness and wanderer. It sees, long before the conscious mind can name it, that something is wrong. When a child is made to smile through sorrow, to accept blame for another's rage, to shrink their spirit to keep peace, The ego adapts, but the soul remembers. The soul does not forget betrayal. It does not swallow injustice. It buries nothing. Rather, it stores everything in images, shadows, dreams, sudden tears, inexplicable fears. These are the soul's archives. Its grief is not linear, but symbolic. It will bring forth the truth not as memory, but as metaphor. And this is its genius. The soul protects the child not through denial, but through displacement, by weaving symbols into dream and story, by tucking pain into the folds of imagination, waiting for the day when the adult is strong enough to remember what the child could not endure. This is why so many who emerge from toxic families carry a mysterious melancholy or are drawn to poetry, mysticism, and depth. They are not broken, they are soul-marked. Their wound has made them porous to deeper truth. While the world praises certainty, they are learning to read the hidden script beneath life. I have seen this again and again. The soul does not abandon you in trauma. It awakens. In fact, it is often in the toxic family system that the soul first asserts itself. It may begin as rage, rebellion, silence, or sensitivity. The difficult child, the emotional one, the too intense, these are often those most attuned to the soul's presence. Their pain is not weakness. It is the refusal to conform to dysfunction, but the soul also suffers deeply. When it is dismissed, ignored, or pathologized, it recedes, not vanishing, but going underground. There, in the underworld of the psyche, it begins its long work of transformation. It gathers images, symbols, ancestral fragments. It waits, it prepares, and one day it rises, perhaps in therapy, perhaps in dreams, perhaps in a sudden breakdown that is really a breakthrough. The soul emerges not to destroy, but to reclaim, to return the self to its wholeness, to remind the adult of the child who still lives within, and still waits to be seen. You must understand, the soul does not grow by avoidance. It grows by descent, into the wound, into the shadow, into the unlived stories of your lineage. And from that descent it brings back not just pain, but medicine. Resilience is not the absence of pain, it is the capacity to feel it all and still remain intact. This is the soul's art. So if you feel lost, fragmented, or overwhelmed by the remnants of a toxic childhood, know this: your soul is not broken. It is speaking. It is asking you to stop performing and start listening, to abandon perfection and embrace truth, to stop surviving and begin becoming. And if you dare to follow it, into your dreams, your tears, your forgotten memories, it will lead you not into madness, but into your most authentic life. Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their children than the unlived life of the parent. What appears on the surface as dysfunction is, to the soul, initiation. I have learned through long observation and painful honesty that the toxic family, while destructive in its unconsciousness, can also be a sacred forge, a place where the first sparks of the self are struck. No child escapes the psychic atmosphere of their home. A parent does not merely raise a child with food, shelter, and rules. They raise them with their unlived life, the dreams they abandoned, the desires they silenced, the fears they never confronted. These unspoken truths seep into the home like fog, invisible yet inescapable. The child breathes them in, not knowing why they feel too heavy, too restless, too responsible for things they did not cause. This is the beginning of soul discomfort. It is the moment the psyche senses something is amiss, though it cannot yet name it. The parent may never say, "I regret my choices," or "I wish I had become more," but the child feels the grief behind the smile, the tension behind the silence. And because the child is naturally empathic, tuned to the emotional field in which they are immersed, they unconsciously begin to carry that unlived burden. In many toxic families, this transfer is not malicious, but automatic. The mother who was never allowed to speak her truth unconsciously suppresses her daughter's voice. The father who lost his dream of artistry becomes rigid with the son who dares to create. The child becomes the stage upon which the parent's unfinished play is rehearsed, again and again. But here lies the paradox I have seen in countless lives. What wounds the child also awakens the soul. The pain of being unseen, misunderstood, or emotionally abandoned becomes the fertile soil for inner vision. The psyche, under pressure, begins to deepen. Like a seed beneath stone, the self begins its secret work underground. The child, aching and alone, turns inward, and there meets the first whispers of something more. Often this manifests as a longing for truth, a need to escape false roles, a hunger for depth. These children grow up asking questions others avoid. Why do I feel different? Why does this family pretend? Who am I beneath the expectations? These questions are not rebellion, they are the soul stirring from sleep. In toxic environments, this soul awakening often happens early. The child becomes psychologically precocious, emotionally alert. They develop intuition as a survival tool, but that very intuition, when honored, becomes a gift. They learn to read people, to sense danger, to name what is not said. And though this makes childhood more painful, it makes adulthood more profound, if they survive the distortion and choose to heal. Because the truth is this: not everyone who is wounded grows, but everyone who grows has been wounded. Toxic families create a crucible in which the ego may fracture, but the self may emerge. The fire that burns away innocence also forges insight. The child who is forced to confront betrayal, abandonment, or manipulation can, through conscious work, become a truth teller, a healer, an artist of the inner world. But they must first understand the pain was not their identity, it was their invitation. Invitation to step outside inherited patterns, invitation to break the ancestral spell, invitation to become what the parent could not in rebellion, but in resolution. And so, I tell you, if you have known pain in your origin story, it does not mean you are cursed. It means you were called, not by fate alone, but by the deeper self within you that saw a crack in the structure and chose to grow through it, not around it. The toxic family may have been your beginning, but it does not have to be your definition. Growth is not just possible, it is the destiny of the awakened soul. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. What most fear, I have come to see, is what most often saves the soul. Trauma, in the eyes of the modern world, is seen only as a wound, a rupture in the psyche, a deviation from wholeness. But to the deeper vision of the self, trauma is also an invitation. Not an invitation to suffering for its own sake, but to awakening, to seeing what has long remained hidden beneath the surface of consciousness. I have written that trauma cracks the shell of the ego, and within that crack light enters. In a toxic family, trauma is often quiet and cumulative. It may not always be a single event, but the slow erosion of the soul's integrity. It is in the child who learns that love must be earned, in the daughter who is never heard unless she pleases, in the son who must become invisible to survive. These are not mere dysfunctions, they are initiations into the mystery of selfhood through suffering. The unconscious does not waste pain, it stores it, shapes it, waits with it, and when the ego can no longer carry the burden, when the old story fractures, something ancient awakens, a dream, a symptom. A breakdown, a silence that can no longer be denied. This is the soul's way of saying, now we begin. Trauma, then, is not the end of the road, it is the threshold, the moment when the psyche, exhausted by pretense, turns inward in search of something real. This is what I have called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, distinct from what your family projected, expected, or demanded. It is not a rebellion against the past, but a reclamation of the self that was buried within it. And here lies the paradox: the very pain that fragmented you also contains the map back home. When trauma is met with consciousness, it becomes symbolic, a portal, a messenger from the unconscious. It reveals the archetypal struggle at the heart of every soul's journey, the confrontation with shadow, the descent into the underworld, the search for the divine within. I have witnessed this many times. The person shattered by betrayal becomes the truth seeker. The one abandoned in childhood becomes the healer of others. The survivor of emotional chaos becomes the builder of inner order. This is not coincidence. It is the pattern of transformation written into the psyche itself. You must not be ashamed of what broke you. You must only be willing to ask, what is this pain trying to awaken in me? In Jungian psychology, trauma is never random. It carries mythic weight. It brings with it the energy of the archetype. When one faces trauma consciously, the energy once trapped in suffering becomes available to the self. The wound becomes a well of wisdom. The scar becomes a symbol of survival, and then of meaning, but this does not happen through avoidance. It happens through engagement, through returning gently and bravely to the site of pain, not to relive it, but to listen to it, to ask what the child within still needs, to meet what was repressed with light, to welcome the broken places back into the wholeness of the self. And so, trauma, far from being the end of the path, becomes the beginning of the inner life. You cannot awaken without suffering, not because suffering is holy, but because the ego does not surrender easily, and it must surrender for the soul to rise. This is the deeper alchemy I have found. The wound is where the self begins to speak. The pain is where the soul reclaims its voice, and trauma, when held with reverence, becomes the teacher that leads you into your most authentic, unbreakable being. You were not meant to remain in your suffering. You were meant to transform through it. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In every family system, there is a basement no one wishes to enter. Its door is kept shut by silence, denial, and the fragile hope that what lives below will remain unseen. Yet the moonlight of the psyche is relentless. Sooner or later, the latch gives way, and the shadow, all that has been repressed, judged, or feared, floods the house. Nowhere is this eruption more dramatic than in a toxic household. Parents who cannot face their own wounds project them onto their children. Anger denied becomes criticism. Fear unspoken becomes control. And lived dreams congeal into resentment. These unowned energies seep into every conversation, every rule, every awkward lull at the dinner table. The family looks ordinary from the street, yet inside it hums with the voltage of what no one dares to feel. For the sensitive child, the shadow is first encountered as atmosphere. It is the tightening in the chest when a certain topic arises, the sudden hush when the front door opens, the intuition that love can turn to ice without warning. The child absorbs these cues like a barometer. Their body becomes the instrument the family will not build for itself. They feel the unspoken rage, sense the hidden sorrow, notice the flicker of envy in a parent's smile. Though they cannot name it, they are already learning the language of the unconscious. Here, paradoxically, lies the seed of strength, because the child must navigate contradictory signals, be perfect, alongside don't outshine me, speak up. Alongside don't disagree, they develop X-ray vision for the soul. They see masks slide, catch shadows in peripheral vision, and while this breeds hyper-vigilance, it also cultivates discernment. The same radar that scans for danger in childhood can, when refined, become the intuition that guides an adult through complex inner work. Yet this gift only flowers if the individual chooses to confront their own portion of the family shadow. Many spend years replaying inherited scripts, marrying criticism because it feels familiar, swallowing shame as if it were identity, policing their own joy because joy was volatile currency at home. The shadow lives on, disguised as personality, until consciousness intervenes. Confronting the shadow requires 3 acts of courage, naming to say, this is envy, or this is rage, without moral condemnation. The shadow shrinks under direct language, owning to admit, it is not just my parents, this lives in me. Projection ends where self-honesty begins. Integrating to invite the repressed energy into dialogue. Anger, what do you guard? Fear, what do you protect? shadow traits are not enemies, they are gatekeepers to unlived vitality. As the shadow is faced, strength arises, not as brittle defense, but as grounded presence. The one, sterifying anger when owned, becomes boundary, setting power. The buried grief when wept becomes compassion. The silenced intuition becomes spiritual sight. The individual no longer needs the family's approval to exist. They carry their own inner authority. And with strength comes spiritual insight, for to witness one's darkness without flinching is to glimpse the vastness that holds both light and shade. The ego's story of good versus bad crumbles, revealing a deeper pattern. Everything exiled from consciousness longs for reunion. In making room for rejected parts, one becomes a microcosm of wholeness, mirroring the psyche's ultimate immunity. Thus, the toxic environment, grim as it may be, can become a chrysalis. The shadow it breeds is heavy, but within that weight is the gravitational pull toward truth. Those who dare descend into their personal underworld return, bearing the gold hidden in the dark, resilience, empathy, insight, and an unshakable sense of authenticity. The family may never change, but the individual who integrates the shadow becomes the living proof that transformation is possible. Their presence alone begins to shift the ancestral narrative. As they walk, the basement door stands open, not as a threat, but as a testament. Here is where darkness was faced and turned into light. Every family is a living myth, its members actors upon an unseen stage of timeless roles. Beneath the daily quarrels, the dinner-table silences, the whispered alliances in hallways, families are animated by forces older than anyone's personal story. These are the archetypes, primordial patterns that rise from the collective unconscious and slip into our relationships like invisible directors. In a balanced household they guide, nurture, and initiate. In a toxic one they distort, dominate, and wound. Yet even their darkest expression can become the compass that leads a strong soul toward transformation. The Great Mother, nurturer or devouring force, every child looks first to the mother for safety. When her archetypal energy is healthy, she is the hearth that sustains life, warmth, acceptance, the permission to exist. But when the mother herself is lost in fear or resentment, the archetype veers into its shadow. The devouring mother who smothers growth, consumes independence, and binds the child to perpetual infancy. The sensitive soul raised in her orbit learns early that approval costs authenticity. Each act of autonomy threatens exile, while obedience purchases fleeting peace. Yet something in that child refuses to be consumed. The very suffocation awakens a fierce longing for freedom, planting the first seed of individuation. Later, when this soul learns to breathe outside her atmosphere, the devouring mother becomes a mirror that revealed the necessity of self-trust. The father as wise old man, or false king the father in archetypal form, is meant to embody the wise old man, the one who sets firm boundaries, models just authority, and opens the gate to the outer world. In toxic families, however, his wisdom may erode into the brittle certainty of the false king. He governs not by guidance but by decree. Respect must be demanded, never earned. To survive him, a child sharpens intuition, reading tone before words, scanning the air for storm clouds of temper. These subtle sciences, born of caution, later become the very skills that allow the adult to navigate complex psyches, to sense hidden motives, to lead without tyranny. The false king, like all shadows, unwittingly trains the hero. The sibling as shadow twin among brothers and sisters, the shadow archetype often finds its playground. One child may carry the family's lighto, obedient, praised, while another is cast as rebel, scapegoat, or problem. Yet both are parts of the same psychic organism. One manifests what the family welcomes, the other what it represses. For the scapegoated child, exile becomes initiation. Stripped of belonging, they seek belonging within. They discover that authenticity is a home the family cannot confiscate, And when the golden child finally tires of perfection's cage, it is often the once shunned sibling who shows the way to realness. Thus the shadow, divided among siblings, becomes the catalyst for deeper kinship, or, when unheeded, the legacy of lifelong estrangement. Trickster at the threshold, no toxic system persists without the mischief of the trickster, that chaotic archetype who exposes hypocrisy, trips authority, and refuses to keep secrets. Sometimes it is a sarcastic teenager, a whistle blowing aunt, or the family member deemed too sensitive and dramatic. Their disruptions feel dangerous because they threaten the pact of silence, yet they also puncture denial, letting fresh air into the cellar. The strong soul often carries the trickster spark. Their slips of honesty, their refusal to laugh at cruel jokes, their inconvenient questions, all signal that transformation has entered the room. Initially punished for disobedience, they eventually recognize that their irrepressible truth telling is a sacred assignment to turn deceit into dialogue. Alchemy of recognition, once these archetypal dynamics are named, their spell weakens. The child who saw only a smothering parent now perceives the wounded great mother seeking wholeness. The tyrannical father reveals himself as a man devoured by his unlived wise old man. Siblings once trapped in rivalry glimpse their shared role as mirror souls. Recognition does not excuse abuse, but it reclaims meaning, and meaning is the alchemist's fire. It transmutes bitterness into insight, powerless rage into creative will. The family's archetypes, no longer unconscious puppeteers, become teachers, each pointing to a faculty the strong soul must integrate. Nurturance without control, authority without oppression, honesty without destruction. In this way, even a toxic household can serve the psyche's grand design, for when one member awakens, the entire family myth is rewritten. The devouring mother learns release, the false king meets humility, the shadow twin becomes ally, the trickster becomes herald of renewal. And the awakened soul steps across the threshold, carrying a lantern lit by every archetype it has survived, ready to illuminate worlds beyond the family's walls. The soul of man is not new. It is ancient, layered, and speaking in voices we have forgotten to hear. There are wounds that do not begin with us, sorrows that echo through the blood, fears that arrive before memory. If you have ever felt haunted by emotions that seem too large, too old, too nameless, know this: you are not imagining it. You are remembering something older than you. In my studies of the psyche, I discovered what I came to call the collective unconscious, a deep, hidden layer of the human mind that exists beneath the personal. This is the ancestral sea, the vast subterranean realm of images, instincts, and forgotten wisdom passed down through generations. It is not shaped by individual experience, but by the life of the species. And within it trauma is preserved, not as story, but as pattern. In families, these patterns are inherited like heirlooms, not in the jewelry box, but in the nervous system. A mother's silence may echo her mother's survival tactic. A father's rage may carry the grief of a grandfather silenced by war. A child's chronic guilt may be the echo of a lineage taught to earn worth through suffering. This is intergenerational trauma, a phenomenon the modern world is only beginning to name, but which the soul has always known. What one generation cannot face, it often passes down, not out of malice, but because the pain was too great, the container too fragile, the consciousness too limited to hold it. And so it arrives at your doorstep, uninvited, unspoken, and heavy. But here lies a truth as sacred as it is difficult. You were chosen to carry what they could not to suffer under it, but to transform it. The strong soul, often born into the most dysfunctional lineages, is not a mistake. They are the one called to awaken the ancestral memory, to face what has remained buried, to give voice to the silence, to weep the tears that were never cried, and in doing so to break the cycle.
You may have felt like the outsider in your family.
The sensitive one, the intense one, the one who doesn't quite belong. But this, I have seen, is often a sign of spiritual inheritance. You do not carry the wound because you are weak. You carry it because you are capable of walking it back to the root, and healing it not only for yourself, but for those who came before and those yet to come. The collective unconscious is not merely a storehouse of pain, it is also a treasury of archetypal power. For every inherited wound there is also a buried gift, the strength of your ancestors, their wisdom, their resilience, their prayers whispered into the silence. These too live in your bones, these too rise when you rise. And when you begin to bring consciousness to the patterns, when you speak what was unspeakable, feel what was forbidden, name what was invisible, you awaken not just your own soul, but the entire lineage. This is not easy work. It requires solitude, truth, and often a dark night of the soul. But it is the work of a healer, not in the external sense, but as one who heals time itself. You become the axis where past and future meet. You become the one who turns pain into prayer. You become the living proof that transformation is not only possible, it is inevitable when one soul dares to wake up. So if the weight you carry feels ancient, that is because it is. And if your strength feels beyond what this life alone should require, that is because it is ancestral. You are not alone. The collective unconscious moves with you, and behind you 1,000 silent ancestors watch, waiting not for revenge, but for release. And when you rise, they rise with you.